In Millfield County, Tennessee, Faith Burton stood in my courtroom with tears in her eyes, clutching a pregnancy test. Her husband, Matthew Burton, was dead, shot twice in the chest on their family farm. But Faith wasn't crying for her murdered husband. She was crying because the DNA test results would soon reveal that the baby she was carrying didn't belong to Matthew. It belonged to Stephen Parker, her secret lover who had vanished the night of the murder. 3 adults, 2 men in love with the same woman, and one deadly confrontation that would tear this small Tennessee town apart. The question isn't who pulled the trigger. The question is who planned the perfect murder and who's been lying to cover it up. This is what really happened on Burton Farm. October 15, 2023. Burton Farm sits on 200 acres of Tennessee countryside, home to the Burton family for 3 generations. Matthew Burton, 29 years old, worked the land with his father while his wife Faith managed their small produce stand. To neighbors, they seemed like the perfect farming couple. But beneath the surface, Faith Burton was living a double life. For 6 months, she had been secretly meeting Stephen Parker, a divorced mechanic from town, in the old tobacco barn behind the main house. Stephen was everything Matthew wasn't: exciting, dangerous, unpredictable. Faith thought she could keep both worlds separate forever. She was wrong. On that October night, both men would confront each other about Faith's pregnancy. Only one of them would walk away alive. At 11:47 p.m., Faith Burton called 911, screaming hysterically that someone had shot her husband. When sheriff's deputies arrived, they found Matthew Burton's body in the gravel driveway, 50 feet from the front door. 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, close range. His cell phone was shattered on the ground beside him. Faith claimed she heard gunshots while watching TV inside the house. She said she ran outside and found Matthew dying. But Detective Ryan Hayes noticed something immediately. Faith's clothes were completely clean. No blood, no dirt, no tears. For a woman who claimed she cradled her dying husband in the driveway, she looked remarkably composed. Her story had holes from the very beginning, and those holes would only get bigger as the investigation progressed.
I was watching television in the living room when I heard 2 loud pops outside. At first, I thought maybe it was a car backfiring or someone shooting at coyotes. That happens a lot around here. But then I heard Matthew calling my name, and his voice sounded wrong, like he was in pain. I ran to the front door and opened it, and that's when I saw him lying in the driveway. There was so much blood. I screamed and ran to him, but he wasn't moving. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at anything. I tried to feel for a pulse like they show on TV, but my hands were shaking so bad. I called 911 immediately. I don't know who would want to hurt Matthew. He was a good man, a hard worker. We had our problems like any married couple, but nothing that would lead to this. I can't think of anyone who had a grudge against him. Maybe it was a robbery gone wrong? We keep some cash in the house for farm expenses. I just don't understand why this happened to us.
Detective Ryan Hayes had investigated dozens of domestic homicides in his 15-year career, and Faith Burton's story didn't add up. The blood spatter pattern showed Matthew had been shot while walking toward the house, not away from it. The killer had been waiting for him. More suspicious was Faith's behavior. She kept checking her phone during questioning, claiming she was worried about her mother. But phone records would later show she had sent 3 text messages to a contact saved simply as S within minutes of calling 911. The messages read, "It's done," "Don't come here," and "I'll call you tomorrow." When Detective Hayes asked Faith about these messages during her second interview, she claimed she didn't remember sending them. That's when investigators realized they weren't dealing with a random killing, they were dealing with a conspiracy. Stephen Parker owned Parker's Auto Repair on the outskirts of Millfield. He was 32 years old, divorced, and had a reputation as a ladies' man. Stephen had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until he aged out of the system at 18. He was charming when he wanted to be, but neighbors described him as moody and unpredictable. Stephen had met Faith Burton 6 months earlier when she brought her car in for an oil change. What started as friendly conversation had quickly turned into something more dangerous. Stephen had been married once before, but his ex-wife Jennifer had left him after 2 years, claiming he was possessive and controlling. She had moved to Nashville and refused to speak about their marriage. But Faith Burton saw something different in Stephen. She saw excitement, passion, and an escape from her quiet life on the farm. For 6 months, Faith and Stephen met secretly in the old tobacco barn on Burton Farm. Faith would tell Matthew she was going to check on the chickens or collect eggs, then slip away to meet her lover. Stephen would park his truck on the back road and walk through the woods to avoid being seen. Their affair was passionate but dangerous. Stephen had been pushing Faith to leave Matthew and start a new life with him. He had even looked at apartments in Nashville, telling Faith they could disappear together. But Faith was torn between two worlds. Matthew provided stability and security, while Stephen offered excitement and passion. Everything changed when Faith discovered she was pregnant. The timing made it impossible to know who the father was. That's when Stephen gave Faith an ultimatum: tell Matthew the truth, or he would tell him himself. Matthew Burton had no idea his wife was living a double life. He worked 12-hour days on the farm, trusting Faith completely. Matthew was a simple man who believed in hard work, family values, and keeping his word. He had been excited when Faith told him she was pregnant, already making plans to convert the spare bedroom into a nursery. But Stephen Parker had been watching the farm, studying Matthew's routines, learning his schedule. Stephen knew Matthew usually checked the livestock around 11:30 p.m. before bed. That night, October 15th, Stephen decided he was tired of hiding. He was tired of secret meetings and stolen moments. He wanted Faith all to himself, and Matthew Burton was standing in his way. What Matthew didn't know was that his wife had already chosen sides, and the choice she made would cost him his life. When phone records arrived 3 days after the murder, Detective Hayes discovered the truth about Faith Burton's secret life. In the month before Matthew's death, Faith had exchanged over 500 text messages and phone calls with Stephen Parker. The messages revealed their sexual relationship, their plans to be together, and most damning of all, their discussions about getting rid of the problem. On October 14th, the day before the murder, Faith had sent Stephen a message that read, "He suspects something. We need to talk." Stephen's response was chilling. "Don't worry, baby. After tomorrow, we won't have to hide anymore." But the most shocking discovery was a voice message Stephen had left Faith just hours before the murder. In it, he said, "I'm done playing games, Faith. Either you tell him tonight or I will. One way or another, this ends now."
Okay, yes, I was having an affair with Stephen Parker. I know how that looks. But I didn't kill my husband. I loved Matthew, but our marriage had become routine, predictable. Stephen made me feel alive again, like I was young and beautiful and desired. The pregnancy complicated everything. I wasn't sure who the father was, and Stephen was pressuring me to leave Matthew. He said if I didn't tell Matthew about us, he would do it himself. That night, Matthew came home from town acting strange. He kept staring at me, asking questions about where I'd been, who I'd been talking to. I think someone might have seen us together and told him. Around 11:30, Matthew said he was going out to check on the animals. That's when I texted Stephen to warn him not to come over. But Stephen didn't respond. 20 minutes later, I heard the gunshots. When I found Matthew in the driveway, I knew Stephen had been there. I knew what had happened, but I was scared. I was pregnant, alone, and the man I'd been having an affair with had just killed my husband. So I lied to protect myself.
When Detective Hayes arrived at Parker's Auto Repair to question Stephen about the phone records, he found the shop closed and Stephen's apartment empty. Stephen had vanished in the middle of the night, taking nothing but his truck and the clothes on his back. He had left behind his tools, his business, and even his wallet with his driver's license inside. Neighbors reported seeing Stephen loading something heavy into the back of his truck around 2 a.m., just hours after Matthew's murder. A search of the property revealed disturbing evidence: bloody clothing hidden in a storage shed, and most damning of all, a .38 caliber revolver buried under loose floorboards in Stephen's apartment. Ballistics tests would confirm it was the murder weapon. But Stephen Parker had disappeared without a trace, and Faith Burton was now facing the possibility that she would be charged as an accessory to murder. With Stephen Parker in the wind and Faith Burton's story falling apart, investigators needed concrete evidence to prove conspiracy. The key was Faith's unborn child. If DNA tests proved Stephen was the father, it would establish motive for the murder and strengthen the case against both conspirators. Faith had initially refused the DNA test, claiming it would harm the baby. But when faced with murder charges, she finally agreed. The test required comparing the baby's DNA with samples from both Matthew Burton and Stephen Parker. Matthew's DNA was easy to obtain from personal items in the house. Stephen's DNA came from hair samples found in his abandoned apartment. As the samples were sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab in Nashville, Faith Burton sat in jail, knowing that the results would either save her life or condemn her to death row. News of the affair and murder rocked the tight-knit community of Millfield. At Barney's Diner on Main Street, neighbors debated Faith's guilt or innocence over coffee and pie. Some defended her, saying she was a victim of Stephen's manipulation. Others called her a cold-blooded killer who betrayed her husband. Matthew's parents publicly forgave Faith, saying their son would have wanted mercy. But the community remained divided. Church attendance dropped as gossip and suspicion tore friendships apart. Everyone wanted to know, was Faith Burton a grieving widow or a calculating murderer? The DNA results would provide the answer. A statewide manhunt was launched for Stephen Parker. His photograph appeared on wanted posters across Tennessee, Alabama, and Kentucky. Police received dozens of tips. Stephen had been spotted at truck stops, gas stations, and homeless camps. But each lead turned out to be false. Stephen Parker had vanished completely. Detective Hayes suspected he had fled to Mexico or assumed a new identity. With each passing day, the trail grew colder, but investigators remained confident they would find him. The DNA results were coming back soon, and Stephen Parker's life was about to change forever. The DNA results would arrive within 48 hours. Stephen Parker remained a fugitive, and Faith Burton waited in her cell, knowing that science would soon reveal the truth that would seal her fate.